The coffee pot trembled in her hands as she approached the lone cowboy at the corner table. And Katherine Vaughn knew that this moment would change everything she had been running from for the past 3 months. The summer heat of 1878 pressed against the windows of the Silver Creek Saloon in Idaho City, Idaho, where Katherine had found work as a waitress just 2 weeks prior. The establishment was one of the few respectable places a woman could work in this mining town that had seen better days since the gold rush fever died down. She had chosen Idaho City precisely because it was fading, a place where people minded their own business and strangers could disappear into the dusty streets without drawing too much attention. But now, as she stood before this particular stranger, her carefully constructed invisibility seemed to crack. The man had arrived an hour before sunset, his presence commanding attention the moment he walked through the door. He was tall, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in spring. Dust covered his clothes and his hat sat on the table beside a worn leather saddlebag. Everything about him spoke of long days on the trail, of a man who lived by his own code in a land that was still being written. Katherine tried to steady her hands as she lifted the pot, but the trembling only worsened. She had not eaten properly in days, too worried about the men she had seen riding into town that morning, too afraid they might be the ones her stepfather had sent to drag her back to Denver. The coffee began to pour, but her grip faltered and the stream wavered dangerously close to the rim of the cup. Suddenly, warm, calloused hands wrapped around hers, steadying both her grip and the pot. The coffee poured smoothly into the cup, steam rising between them. Katherine's breath caught in her throat as she looked up into the stranger's face. His expression held no judgment, only a quiet concern that made her chest tighten. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, though her voice cracked on the words. He did not release her hands immediately. Instead, his thumbs brushed gently across her knuckles in a gesture so tender it nearly brought tears to her eyes. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, like gravel smoothed by river water. "What are you running from?" The question hung in the air between them, direct and unflinching. Katherine felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. She glanced around the saloon, but the few other patrons were lost in their own conversations and card games. The owner, Mrs. Henley, was in the back room doing inventory. They were, for all intents and purposes, alone in this moment. "I don't know what you mean," Katherine said, but even she could hear the lie in her words. The cowboy's eyes never left her face. "I have been tracking men and reading signs on the trail for 15 years. I know what fear looks like. I know what it means when someone cannot stop looking at the door, when they flinch at sudden sounds, when their hands shake from more than just exhaustion." Katherine pulled her hands free, clutching the coffee pot against her chest like a shield. "You should mind your own business, Mr. Isaac," he said. "Isaac Norton. And maybe I should, but I have never been good at watching someone in trouble and doing nothing about it." She wanted to walk away, to return to the safety of anonymity, but something in his gaze held her in place. It was not pity she saw there, but recognition. This was a man who understood what it meant to run, to hide, to fear the past catching up with you. "Katherine," she said finally. "Katherine Vaughn. And I appreciate your concern, but I can handle my own problems." Isaac leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "I am sure you can. But sometimes handling problems alone is just another way of drowning slowly instead of all at once." Before Katherine could respond, the saloon doors swung open with a crash that made her jump. 2 men walked in, both wearing the hard expressions of hired guns. They were not the men she had seen that morning, but they carried themselves with the same predatory alertness. Her stomach dropped as their eyes swept the room. Isaac noticed her reaction immediately. Without a word, he stood and positioned himself between Katherine and the newcomers, his movement casual but deliberate. "You got somewhere you can go, somewhere safe for a few hours." "The boarding house where I stay," Katherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Peterson's place 3 streets over. Go there now. Use the back door of this place and do not look back. I will handle this." "You do not even know what this is," Katherine protested, even as her feet began to move. Isaac's hand briefly touched her elbow, the contact sending an unexpected warmth through her despite the fear. "Then maybe you can tell me later. After you are somewhere those men cannot find you." Katherine did not argue further. She slipped through the kitchen, past a surprised Mrs. Henley, and out into the alley behind the saloon. The evening air was cooler than inside, but her skin still felt flushed with heat and adrenaline. She made her way through the back streets of Idaho City, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main thoroughfare where miners and businessmen conducted their evening transactions. Mrs. Peterson's boarding house was a modest 2-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but it was clean, and the owner asked few questions. Katherine let herself in through the back door and climbed the narrow stairs to her small room on the 2nd floor. Once inside, she locked the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Who was Isaac Norton, and why had he helped her? More importantly, what would he do now? She moved to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain, looking down at the street below. The town was settling into its evening rhythm, with lamplight beginning to glow in windows and the sound of piano music drifting from various establishments. Everything appeared normal, but Katherine knew better than to trust appearances. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and finally allowed herself to think about what she was running from. Her stepfather, Marcus Vaughn, was one of Denver's most successful businessmen, a man who had built his fortune through mining investments and careful political connections. To the outside world, he was respectable and generous, a pillar of the community. But Katherine knew the truth. She knew about the workers who died in his mines due to negligence, about the families he evicted when they could not pay their rent, about the way he looked at her after her mother died 2 years ago. The marriage had been arranged without her consent, a business transaction between Marcus and another wealthy man nearly twice her age. Katherine had been told she had no choice, that at 22 she was already past her prime and should be grateful anyone wanted her. But she had seen the coldness in her intended husband's eyes, had heard the rumors about what happened to his first wife. So she had taken what little money her mother had left her, packed a small bag, and fled in the middle of the night. That had been 3 months ago. She had moved from town to town, working whatever job she could find, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for Marcus to find her. He would not let her go easily. She represented his reputation, his control, and most importantly, the inheritance her mother had left her that he could not touch unless she married the man he had chosen. A soft knock on her door made Katherine freeze. "Miss Vaughn, you have a visitor." Mrs. Peterson's voice was kind but curious. Katherine stood slowly, her mind racing. "Who is it?" "A gentleman. Says his name is Isaac Norton." Should I send him away? Katherine's breath caught. He had followed her. She should be afraid, should tell Mrs. Peterson to turn him away, but instead she found herself saying, "No. I will be down in a moment." She quickly checked her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin, tucking stray dark hair back into her bun and smoothing her worn dress. Her hands were steadier now, though her heart still raced. She descended the stairs to find Isaac standing in the front parlor, his hat in his hands. Mrs. Peterson hovered nearby, her protective instincts clearly engaged. "It is all right," Katherine assured the older woman. "We can speak here, Mrs." Peterson nodded but made no move to leave the room entirely, settling herself instead in a chair near the doorway with some mending. Katherine appreciated the gesture. In a world where a woman's reputation could be destroyed by improper conduct, Mrs. Peterson was ensuring everything remained respectable. Isaac waited until Katherine sat on the small sofa before settling into a chair across from her. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 27 or 28, with strong features and a small scar above his left eyebrow. His clothes were well worn but clean, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Those men were looking for a young woman who ran away from Denver 3 months ago," Isaac said without preamble. "They described her as having dark hair, blue eyes, about 22 years old. They said her family is worried sick and wants her to come home." Katherine's hands clenched in her lap. "What did you tell them?" "That I had been traveling for weeks and had not paid attention to any young women in town, that if they wanted information they should ask the sheriff." Isaac's eyes held hers steadily. "They left to do just that. I figured you should know." "The sheriff will tell them where I work," Katherine said, despair creeping into her voice. "Mrs. Henley had to register me with the local authorities when she hired me. It is required by law. Then you need to leave Idaho City, tonight if possible." Katherine stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "And go where? I have been running for 3 months. Every town I stop in, they eventually find me. Marcus has connections everywhere, money to hire as many men as it takes." She turned back to Isaac, frustration and fear making her voice sharp. "Why do you even care? You do not know me. This is not your problem." Isaac set his hat aside and stood, though he kept a respectful distance. "My father was a hard man who believed he owned everything and everyone around him, including my mother. She tried to run once when I was 10 years old. He found her, brought her back, and I watched her spirit break a little more each day after that. She died when I was 15, and I have always wondered if things might have been different if someone had helped her when she tried to escape." The raw honesty in his words stripped away Katherine's defenses. She saw the old pain in his eyes, the guilt of a boy who had been powerless to protect his mother. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I am not telling you this for sympathy. I am telling you so you understand why I am offering to help you." Isaac took a step closer. "I have a ranch about 2 days' ride from here, up in the mountains where the mining camps gave way to cattle country. It is remote, hard to find if you do not know the way. You could stay there, at least until we figure out a better plan." "You want me to ride into the wilderness with a complete stranger?" Katherine asked, though the offer tempted her more than she wanted to admit. "I want you to have a choice, which it sounds like you have not had much of lately." Isaac's voice was gentle but firm. "I will not lie and say there is no risk. But staying here seems like a guaranteed way to get caught, and if you come with me, I give you my word as a man who knows what it is like to feel trapped that I will not take advantage of your situation. You will have your own space, your own choices." Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat from her position by the door. "Begging your pardon, but I have been running this boarding house for 20 years, and I have gotten pretty good at reading people. This young man seems sincere, Miss Vaughn. And those men who are looking for you do not have kind faces. I hate to say it, but I do not think you are safe here anymore." Katherine looked between them, these two near strangers who were offering her more help than her own family had. The decision should have been harder, should have required more thought, but desperation had a way of clarifying things. "When would we leave?" "Within the hour, if you can be ready." We will ride through the night while we have darkness as cover. By the time those men figure out you are gone, we will be far enough ahead that tracking us will be difficult." Katherine nodded slowly, her mind already cataloging what little she owned. "I do not have much to pack. But I should warn you, if Marcus finds out you helped me, he will make trouble for you. He has lawyers and connections to law enforcement. He could accuse you of kidnapping or worse." Isaac's expression hardened. "Let him try. I have been living on the edge of civilized society long enough that threats from city businessmen do not scare me much. Besides, you are a grown woman making your own choice. That is not kidnapping." 20 minutes later, Katherine stood in her small room, everything she owned packed into a single carpet bag. She had changed into her most practical dress and pulled on her mother's old riding boots, the leather cracked but still sturdy. She allowed herself one moment to feel the weight of what she was doing. She was about to ride off into the wilderness with a man she had met only hours ago, trusting him with not just her safety, but potentially her life. Yet something in her core, some instinct that had kept her alive and free for 3 months, told her this was the right choice. Isaac Norton had looked at her with recognition, not possession. He had offered help without demanding anything in return. In a world where men had spent her entire life trying to control her, that alone was worth the risk. Isaac was waiting outside with 2 horses, both saddled and ready. One was a powerful bay gelding that was clearly his mount, and the other was a smaller mare with a gentle eye. "She is steady and sure-footed," Isaac said, helping Katherine secure her bag to the saddle. "Her name is Rosie." Mrs. Peterson appeared with a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Some food for your journey, bread, cheese, and dried meat. It is not much, but it will help." Katherine embraced the older woman impulsively. "Thank you for everything. You take care of yourself, child. And you," Mrs. Peterson turned to Isaac with a stern expression, "you make sure she stays safe or you will answer to me." Isaac's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Yes, madam." They mounted and rode out of Idaho City as the last light faded from the sky. Katherine did not look back. She had learned months ago that looking back only made the leaving harder. Instead, she focused on the road ahead, on the steady rhythm of Rosie's hooves, on the solid presence of Isaac riding beside her. They traveled in silence for the first hour, following a narrow trail that led away from the main roads and into the foothills. The night was clear, and the moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see the path. Katherine found herself relaxing into the saddle, her body remembering the riding lessons her mother had insisted upon when she was younger. Marcus had sold her mother's horses after the funeral, along with most of her personal possessions, but the skills remained. "Are you holding up all right?" Isaac asked as they paused to let the horses drink from a small stream. "Better than I expected," Katherine admitted. "I had forgotten how much I enjoyed riding. Your family had horses. My real father did. He died when I was 15. He was a rancher, actually, outside of Denver. After he died, my mother eventually married Marcus Vaughn, and everything changed." Katherine surprised herself by continuing. "My father was a good man. He taught me to ride and rope, to read the weather and respect the land. He would have hated what Marcus is, what he tried to turn me into." Isaac was quiet for a moment, then said, "He would be proud that you ran. Takes courage to choose freedom over comfort." "It does not feel like courage. Most days it feels like terror. Courage and terror are not opposites. Courage is being terrified and doing the thing anyway." They remounted and continued climbing into the mountains. The air grew cooler and the landscape more rugged. Pine trees rose around them, their scent sharp and clean after the dust of the valley. Katherine found herself studying Isaac as they rode, noticing the way he moved with his horse as one unit, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, the way he seemed completely at home in this wild landscape. "What made you become a rancher?" she asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to keep her mind off the ache building in her muscles. "After my mother died, I left home. Worked as a ranch hand for various outfits, saved every penny I could. About 5 years ago, I found a piece of land that nobody wanted because it was too remote and the winters were too harsh. I bought it cheap and built a cabin with my own hands. Started with a dozen head of cattle and built from there." He glanced at her. "It is not much, but it is mine. Nobody can take it from me or tell me what to do with it." Katherine heard the echo of her own desires in his words. "That sounds wonderful. It is hard work. There are days when the isolation gets to me, when I wonder if I made the right choice living so far from civilization. But then, I remember what it felt like to have no control over my own life, and the isolation seems like a fair trade." They rode through the night with brief stops to rest the horses. Katherine dozed in the saddle a few times, jerking awake with the disorientation of exhaustion. Each time Isaac was there, a steady presence keeping watch. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky with streaks of gold and pink, they finally stopped in a small clearing beside a creek. "We will camp here for a few hours," Isaac said, helping Katherine dismount. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, stiff from hours of riding. Isaac caught her elbow, steadying her. "Easy now. You did well for someone who has not been on a horse in a while." "I do not feel like I did well," Katherine said, grimacing as she tried to stretch out the knots in her back. Isaac busied himself unsaddling the horses and rubbing them down while Katherine stood by the creek, splashing cold water on her face. The mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Birds were beginning their morning songs, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the call of an elk. Despite her exhaustion and the aches in her body, Katherine felt something inside her begin to loosen. "Here." Isaac handed her a bedroll. "Get some sleep. I will keep watch." "You need sleep too," Katherine protested. "I will rest later. Right now you need it more." Katherine was too tired to argue. She spread the bedroll under a large pine tree and lay down, intending to rest for just a few minutes. But the moment her head touched the makeshift pillow, exhaustion pulled her under like a riptide. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. The sun was high in the sky, and Katherine realized with a start that she had slept for hours. She sat up quickly, disoriented, and found Isaac crouched by a small fire, cooking breakfast. "Good morning," he said, glancing up with what might have been amusement. "Or afternoon, I suppose. It is nearly noon." Katherine felt her face flush. "You should have woken me. You needed the rest. Besides, we are far enough ahead now that we can afford to take our time." He handed her a tin plate with bacon and some kind of flatbread. "It is not fancy, but it will fill your stomach." They ate in comfortable silence. Katherine found herself studying Isaac in the daylight, noticing details she had missed in the darkness and lamplight. His hands were scarred and calloused from hard work, but they moved with surprising gentleness as he handled the cooking utensils. His face had the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, but his eyes held an intelligence and depth that spoke of a man who thought deeply about things. "Tell me about your ranch," Katherine said as she finished her food. Isaac leaned back against a tree trunk, cradling his coffee cup. "It is about 300 acres of mountain valley with good grazing and plenty of water. The cabin is small but solid. I have about 50 head of cattle now, along with a few horses. In the summer, I drive the cattle down to market and use the money to buy supplies for winter. It is a simple life, but it suits me. Do you have any help? Ranch hands?" I hire a few men during branding and roundup, but mostly it is just me. I like it that way." He paused, then added, "Though I will admit, it gets lonely sometimes. There are days when I do not see another human being, when the only conversations I have are with my horse and my dog." "You have a dog?" For the first time, Katherine saw Isaac's face truly light up. "A big mutt named Bear. He is probably destroying my cabin right now, wondering where I went. I left him with a neighbor when I came down to Idaho City to sell some horses." The image of this serious, capable cowboy with a dog named Bear made Katherine smile despite everything. "I would like to meet him." "He will love you. He loves everyone. Most useless guard dog in the territory, but he is good company." They broke camp in the early afternoon and continued their journey. The trail grew steeper and more challenging, winding through dense forest and across rocky slopes. Isaac proved to be an excellent guide, finding the easiest paths and pointing out landmarks. He told her about the land they were crossing, the history of the area, the animals and plants they encountered. Katherine found herself fascinated, drawn into his quiet passion for this wilderness that he had made his home. As they traveled, she also found herself increasingly aware of him in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude or circumstance. The way he moved in the saddle, the deep timbre of his voice, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face into something warmer and more open. She noticed the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the care he took to ensure her comfort without being overbearing about it. By the time they made camp for their second night, something had shifted between them. The initial wariness had given way to an easy companionship, punctuated by moments of awareness that left Katherine breathless. When Isaac helped her dismount, his hands lingered a moment longer than necessary on her waist. When their fingers brushed as he handed her a cup of coffee, she felt the contact like a spark. They sat by the fire as darkness fell, the flames casting dancing shadows across Isaac's face. Katherine wrapped herself in a blanket against the mountain chill and found the courage to ask the question that had been building in her mind. "Why have you never married?" Isaac poked at the fire with a stick, his expression thoughtful. "I suppose I never met anyone who wanted the life I wanted. Most women I have known prefer the comforts of town, the society of neighbors, the security of civilization. I cannot offer those things." "Some women might find what you offer more valuable than comfort," Katherine said softly. His eyes met hers across the fire, and the intensity in them made her heart race. "And what about you, Katherine? What do you want?" It was a question no one had ever asked her before. Marcus had told her what she should want. Her intended husband had assumed what she wanted. But Isaac was asking, genuinely asking, as if her answer mattered. "I want to be free," she said finally. "I want to wake up in the morning and not be afraid. I want to make my own choices, even if they are hard ones. I want to be seen as a person, not as property or a pretty thing to put on display." She paused, then added with painful honesty, "And I want to be loved for who I am, not for what I represent or what I can bring to a business arrangement." "Those seem like reasonable things to want," Isaac said. "Basic things. It is a shame you had to run to have them." They talked long into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Katherine learned that Isaac had a younger sister he had not seen in years, that he loved to read whenever he could get his hands on books, that he had taught himself to play the harmonica during long winter nights. Isaac learned that Katherine had always wanted to be a teacher, that she loved thunderstorms and hated crowds, that she had a talent for drawing that she had not indulged since her mother's death. When they finally settled down to sleep, Katherine felt something she had not experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate hope that had fueled her flight from Denver, but a quieter, deeper hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a place in this world where she belonged. They reached Isaac's ranch in the late afternoon of the third day. Katherine's first glimpse of it took her breath away. The cabin sat in a small valley surrounded by mountains, with a creek running nearby and meadows stretching out in golden waves. The cabin itself was modest but well built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. There was a small barn, a corral, and various outbuildings. Everything spoke of hard work and careful attention. As they rode up, a large brown dog came bounding toward them, barking joyously. Bear, true to his name, was massive and shaggy, with oversized paws and a tail that wagged his entire body. He nearly knocked Isaac over in his enthusiasm, then turned his attention to Katherine, sniffing her thoroughly before deciding she was acceptable and offering her the same exuberant greeting. Katherine laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. She knelt and let Bear lick her face, his joy infectious and uncomplicated. When she looked up, she found Isaac watching her with an expression that made her chest tighten. There was longing in his gaze and something deeper that she was afraid to name. "Welcome home," Isaac said softly, and Katherine realized with a start that it felt like home, more than any place had in years. The cabin interior was simple but comfortable. One large room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A ladder led to a sleeping loft. Everything was surprisingly neat and organized for a bachelor's dwelling. Isaac had built most of the furniture himself, Katherine learned, from the sturdy table to the rocking chair by the fireplace. "You can take the loft," Isaac said, carrying her bag up the ladder. "I will sleep down here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Katherine protested. "You can and you will. I have spent plenty of nights sleeping on the ground. A bedroll by the fire is luxury in comparison." His tone allowed no argument. They spent the rest of the day settling in. Isaac showed Katherine around the property, introducing her to his horses and explaining the routine of the ranch. Katherine found herself fascinated by all of it, by the self-sufficiency of it, by the way Isaac had built a life with his own hands and determination. That evening, they cooked dinner together in the small kitchen. Katherine made biscuits while Isaac prepared a stew from dried meat and vegetables from his root cellar. They moved around each other in the confined space with an ease that surprised them both, as if they had been doing this dance for years rather than days. After dinner, they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. Bear lay at their feet, content and drowsy. The silence between them was comfortable, but charged with unspoken things. "I have been thinking," Isaac said finally. "Those men who are looking for you will not give up easily. We need a plan that goes beyond you just hiding here." Katherine had been thinking the same thing. "What do you suggest?" "The simplest solution would be marriage. If you were married, your stepfather would have no legal claim on you anymore. You would be your husband's responsibility, not his." Katherine's heart stuttered. "Are you suggesting that we—" "I am saying it is an option," Isaac said carefully. "A practical solution to a practical problem. It would not have to be a real marriage. It could be in name only, just for legal protection." Katherine stood and walked to the edge of the porch, her emotions churning. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, to grab onto this solution that Isaac was offering. But another part, the part that had been bartered and sold like property, recoiled at the idea of another marriage of convenience. "I appreciate the offer," she said quietly. "But I did not run from one arranged marriage just to enter another one, even if your intentions are honorable." She heard Isaac move behind her, but he did not touch her. "You are right. That was thoughtless of me. I am sorry." Katherine turned to face him. In the fading light, his face was shadowed, but she could see the genuine regret in his expression. "Do not apologize for trying to help. I just need time to think about all of this, to figure out what I really want. Take all the time you need. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt startlingly natural. Katherine rose early and helped Isaac with the morning chores, feeding the animals and gathering eggs from the chickens she had not even known he kept. She learned to milk the cow, to churn butter, to tend the vegetable garden that Isaac had planted in the spring. Her hands, which had been soft from months of indoor work, began to roughen and callous, and she found she did not mind. Isaac was a patient teacher, never condescending, always willing to show her how to do things rather than simply doing them for her. He taught her to rope, to read the weather, to recognize the signs of animal tracks. In turn, Katherine used her education to help organize his accounts and inventory, systems that had been haphazard at best under his solitary management. But beyond the practical aspects of ranch life, something deeper was growing between them. Katherine caught Isaac watching her sometimes with an expression that made her pulse quicken. She became increasingly aware of the small touches that passed between them in the course of their work. The brush of hands, the steadying grip on her elbow, the way their shoulders pressed together when they sat on the porch in the evenings. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, a summer storm rolled through the valley. Katherine had always loved storms, and she stood on the porch watching the lightning dance across the mountains, feeling the electric charge in the air. Isaac came to stand beside her, so close she could feel the heat of his body. "You are not afraid of the lightning," he observed. "No, I have always found it beautiful, powerful and wild and free." She glanced at him. "Is that strange?" "Not strange, just different. Most people fear things they cannot control. I suppose I have had enough of being controlled. The uncontrollable seems honest by comparison." Thunder cracked overhead and Katherine laughed, tipping her face up to feel the first drops of rain. Isaac caught her hand, and she turned to find him looking at her with such raw emotion that her breath caught. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "This was supposed to be a practical arrangement. You needed help and I could provide it. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being just about helping someone in need." He stepped closer, his hand still holding hers. "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I started falling that first moment in the saloon when your hands shook, and you looked at me like you expected judgment but hoped for kindness." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Isaac, you do not have to say anything," he continued. "I am not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that if we did marry, it would not be a practical arrangement for me. It would be real. But I also understand if that is not what you want, if you need more time, if you do not feel the same way." "Isaac," Katherine said again, this time managing to make it more than just his name. "Stop talking." She reached up and pulled his face down to hers, kissing him with all the pent-up emotion and desire that had been building since the moment he steadied her trembling hands. Isaac froze for half a second, then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he kissed her back with a passion that made her knees weak. They kissed in the rain, water streaming down their faces, thunder rolling around them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Katherine rested her forehead against his chest and felt his heart racing as fast as her own. "I have been trying so hard not to fall in love with you," she whispered. "I told myself it was too fast, too soon, that I was just grateful for your help. But the truth is, I am falling in love with you too, with your kindness and your strength and the way you see me as a person rather than a possession." Isaac's arms tightened around her. "Then marry me. Not as a practical solution, but because we want to build a life together, Because we choose each other. Katherine pulled back to look into his face, seeing the vulnerability there, the hope and fear mixed together. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you. They were married a week later by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through the area. The ceremony was simple, held in the cabin with only the preacher, his wife, and Isaac's nearest neighbor as witnesses. Katherine wore her best dress, mended and cleaned, with wildflowers in her hair that Isaac had picked for her that morning. Isaac wore a new shirt that Katherine had helped him choose from the general store on their trip to the small settlement 15 miles away. When Isaac slipped a simple gold band on her finger and kissed her as his wife, Katherine felt tears slide down her cheeks. These were not tears of fear or sadness, but of joy and relief, and the overwhelming feeling that she had finally found where she belonged. The neighbor, a grizzled rancher named Tom who owned the spread adjacent to Isaac's, insisted on providing a wedding supper. His wife had died years ago, but he was a surprisingly good cook and had prepared a feast of roasted venison, fresh bread, and a pie made from wild berries. Knew this boy needed a wife, Tom said, raising a glass in toast. Maybe now he will stop being so damned solitary. No offense, Isaac. None taken, Isaac said, his hand firmly clasped with Katherine's under the table. You were right. After their guests departed, Katherine and Isaac were finally alone. The evening had turned cool and Isaac built up the fire while Katherine changed into her nightgown in the loft. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear but with anticipation and nervousness. She had known this moment would come, had wanted it to come, but the reality of it still felt overwhelming. When she descended the ladder, she found Isaac waiting by the fire, his expression gentle and patient. We do not have to do anything tonight, he said softly. We have all the time in the world. But Katherine crossed the room to him, taking his hands in hers. I want this, I want you. I am just nervous. So am I, Isaac admitted, and his honesty made her love him even more. He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, with a tenderness that made her heart ache. They made love by the firelight, learning each other's bodies with patience and care. Isaac was gentle but passionate, always attentive to Katherine's responses, making sure she was comfortable and willing. For Katherine, it was a revelation. This was nothing like the cold transaction she had feared marriage would be. This was connection, intimacy, two people choosing to be vulnerable with each other. Afterward, they lay together in Isaac's bedroll, Katherine's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. Bear, who had been banished to the porch during the wedding night festivities, scratched at the door and whined pitifully until Isaac laughed and let him in. The big dog settled by the fireplace with a contented sigh, and Katherine felt a wave of pure happiness wash over her. Are you happy? Isaac asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. Happier than I ever thought possible, Katherine said honestly. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to be too good to be true. It is real. We are real. And I promise you I will spend every day trying to make sure you never regret choosing this life. I could never regret you. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Katherine's life. She threw herself into learning everything about ranch life, discovering talents and strengths she had never known she possessed. She learned to ride like she had been born to it, racing across the meadows with Isaac beside her and Bear chasing along behind. She learned to shoot, to track, to read the sky for weather signs. But she also made the cabin into a true home. She sewed curtains for the windows and braided rugs for the floor. She painted wildflower designs on the dishes and planted herbs in window boxes. She filled the space with warmth and color and life in a way that made Isaac stop sometimes and just stare around him in wonder. They developed their own rhythms and traditions, Morning coffee on the porch while they planned their day. Evening walks down to the creek. Reading aloud to each other by firelight, sharing the books that Isaac had collected over the years. Making love in their bed in the loft, learning what brought each other pleasure, growing more comfortable and adventurous with each other. Katherine also discovered that she had a natural affinity for the cattle. She could move among them calmly, reading their moods and behaviors in a way that impressed even Isaac. When one of the cows had difficulty giving birth, Katherine was the one who stayed up all night with her, coaxing and encouraging until a healthy calf finally arrived. Isaac found them in the barn at dawn, Katherine covered in blood and birth fluids but beaming with joy as the calf nursed for the first time. "You are something else," Isaac said, pulling her into his arms despite the mess. "I have never seen anyone take to this life the way you have." "This is what I was meant to do," Katherine said simply. "I just did not know it until now." But their peace could not last forever. 3 months after their wedding, on a crisp autumn morning, 3 men rode up to the ranch. Katherine was in the garden harvesting the last of the vegetables before the first frost when bears barking alerted her. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her blood turn to ice when she recognized one of the men. It was Thomas Garrett, the man Marcus had arranged for her to marry. He was older than she remembered, perhaps 50 now, with cold eyes and a hard mouth. The 2 men with him had the look of hired guns. Katherine turned and ran for the cabin, but Garrett spurred his horse forward, cutting her off. "Katherine, or should I say Mrs. Vaughn, though I understand you have taken another man's name now." "Get off our property," Katherine said, proud that her voice did not shake even though her heart was racing. "This is a conversation we need to have, my dear. I have come a very long way to bring you home. This is my home, and I am not going anywhere with you." Garrett dismounted and Katherine took a step back. "Do not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Your stepfather is willing to forgive your youthful indiscretion. So am I. We can have the marriage annulled and proceed with our original arrangement. I do not want your forgiveness and I do not want to marry you. I am already married to some cowboy who lives like a hermit in the mountains." Garrett's voice dripped with disdain. "That can be rectified. Marriages can be dissolved, especially when they were entered into under questionable circumstances. The only questionable circumstances were the ones you and Marcus tried to force me into." A shot rang out, and everyone froze. Isaac stood on the porch of the cabin, a rifle in his hands, smoke still curling from the barrel. "The lady asked you to leave. I suggest you do so." Garrett's men reached for their weapons, but Isaac's rifle swung toward them. "I would not recommend it. I can shoot the wings off a fly at this distance, and I am not feeling particularly patient right now." "You must be the cowboy," Garrett said, turning to face Isaac with an expression of contempt. "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with?" "I have connections to judges and politicians across the territory. I can destroy you." "Maybe you can. But right now, in this moment, I am the one with the rifle and you are the ones trespassing on my land." Isaac's voice was cold and hard, nothing like the gentle tone Katherine was used to. This was the man who had survived in a harsh land through strength and determination. "My wife told you to leave. I am telling you the same thing. You have until the count of 10 to get back on your horses." "This is not over," Garrett said, his face flushed with anger. "Marcus will not let this stand. He will send the law after you, after both of you. Then the law can come. But until they do, you need to leave. 1, 2. Garrett remounted with poor grace, his men following suit. As they turned their horses, Garrett looked at Katherine one more time. "You will regret this, Katherine. You will wish you had been reasonable." "I already regret one thing," Katherine called after him, "that I did not run sooner." They watched the three men ride away until they disappeared into the trees. Only then did Katherine's legs give out and she sank to the ground. Isaac was there immediately, gathering her into his arms. "Are you all right?" I thought I had escaped. I thought they would stop looking eventually. Katherine was shaking, the adrenaline draining away and leaving her weak. "He is right about one thing. Marcus will not stop. He will use every resource he has to bring me back." Isaac helped her to her feet and guided her into the cabin, settling her into the rocking chair. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "Then we will fight him. We will hire a lawyer if we need to. We will go to the territorial governor if necessary. You are my wife, legally and in every other way. Marcus Vaughn does not get to take you back. You do not understand what he is capable of," Katherine said desperately. "He has destroyed people who crossed him. He could take your ranch, have you arrested on false charges, ruin your reputation. Let him try. I am not afraid of him, Katherine. I am afraid of losing you." Over the next week, they prepared for the worst. Isaac rode to the nearest town with a telegraph office and sent messages to every authority he could think of, documenting Katherine's situation and their legal marriage. He also hired a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Elizabeth Morgan, who had a reputation for taking on cases that other lawyers would not touch. Elizabeth rode out to the ranch to meet with them, her presence somehow both elegant and practical. She listened to Katherine's story without interruption, taking notes with quick, efficient movements. "This Marcus Vaughn sounds like a piece of work," Elizabeth said when Katherine finished. "But the law is on your side. You are 22 years old, which makes you an adult capable of making your own decisions. You were not married or engaged when you left Denver, so there are no legal contracts to enforce. And you are now legally married to Mr. Norton, which removes any claim your stepfather might have had as your guardian." "But he could claim Isaac kidnapped me," Katherine said. "That I was coerced. He could claim that, but proving it would be another matter. We have multiple witnesses to your marriage, including a preacher and his wife. We have documentation showing you have been living here voluntarily, working the ranch alongside your husband. And most importantly, we have your testimony." Elizabeth leaned forward. "Katherine, are you prepared to stand up in court if necessary and tell your story? To face Marcus and Garrett and tell the world what they tried to do to you?" Katherine thought about all the years of being silenced, of having her words dismissed and her choices ignored. She thought about the woman she had become in these mountains, strong and capable and free. She looked at Isaac, at the faith and love in his eyes, and felt something solidify in her core. "Yes," she said firmly, "I will tell my story. I will not let them silence me anymore." The legal battle, when it came, was everything they had feared and prepared for. Marcus did indeed bring charges, claiming that Isaac had lured Katherine away with false promises and that she was being held against her will. Thomas Garrett supported the claims, painting himself as a concerned fiancé worried about his beloved's welfare. But Elizabeth Morgan was as good as her reputation. She systematically dismantled every claim, presenting evidence of Katherine's voluntary departure from Denver, testimonies from people who had helped her along the way, documentation of her legal marriage to Isaac. She brought Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house to testify about the men who had been hunting Katherine, about Katherine's fear and desperation. And then she put Katherine on the stand. Katherine faced the courtroom with her head high, Isaac's presence in the front row giving her strength. She told her story from beginning to end, not sparing any details. She described her father's death, her mother's eventual remarriage to Marcus, the way Marcus had treated her after her mother died. She talked about the arranged marriage to Garrett, about overhearing rumors of what had happened to his first wife, about her terror at being trapped in another loveless union. "Why did you not simply refuse the marriage?" the opposing lawyer asked, trying to make her seem unreasonable. "I did refuse," Katherine said clearly, "multiple times, but Marcus made it clear that I had no choice. He controlled my inheritance, my home, every aspect of my life. He said that if I did not marry Mr. Garrett, I would find myself on the street with nothing. And yet you ended up on the street anyway when you ran away." "I ended up free," Katherine corrected. "There is a difference between choosing hardship and having it forced upon you." The courtroom was silent as Katherine described her months of running, the constant fear, the struggle to survive. And then her voice softened as she talked about meeting Isaac, about his kindness and respect, about finding a home and a life she had built with her own hands. "Mr. Norton did not coerce me," Katherine said, looking directly at Marcus where he sat behind the prosecutor's table. "He offered me a choice. That is all I ever wanted, the freedom to choose my own path. And I choose him. I choose this life. And no matter what you say or do, you cannot take that away from me." The judge, a stern older man who had presided over countless cases, listened to closing arguments with an impassive expression. Then he called a recess to review the evidence and testimony. Isaac and Katherine waited outside the courthouse, sitting on a bench in the autumn sunshine. Elizabeth had told them she thought the case was solid, but nothing was guaranteed. They held hands tightly, not speaking, each lost in their own thoughts about what they would do if the ruling went against them. "If it goes badly," Isaac said finally, "we could leave, go to Canada or California. Start over somewhere he cannot reach." "I am tired of running," Katherine said. "I want to fight, I want to win. Then we will fight, whatever it takes." When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. Katherine held her breath as he shuffled his papers and finally looked up. "I have reviewed all the evidence and testimony presented in this case," the judge said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "It is clear to me that Miss Katherine Vaughn, now Mrs. Katherine Norton, is an adult woman who made conscious choices about her own life. While Mr. Vaughn and Mr. Garrett may disagree with those choices, they have no legal standing to override them." Relief began to flow through Katherine, but she did not let herself celebrate yet. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I find the evidence of coercion and undue influence to be severely lacking. In fact, based on Mrs. Norton's testimony, it appears that any coercion present in this situation came not from Mr. Isaac Norton, but from Mr. Vaughn and Mr. Garrett themselves." He fixed both men with a stern look. "Attempting to force a woman into an unwanted marriage, regardless of your intentions, is not acceptable behavior." Marcus stood abruptly, his face red. "This is absurd. I am her legal guardian." "You were her stepfather while she was a minor," the judge corrected. "She is now an adult and married. You have no legal authority over her whatsoever." He brought his gavel down. "I find in favor of the defendants all charges are dismissed. Mrs. Norton is free to return to her home and her husband. This case is closed." The gavel's crack seemed to echo through the courtroom. Katherine felt tears streaming down her face as Isaac pulled her into his arms. Around them, people were reacting to the verdict, some with approval, others with shock. Elizabeth Morgan was smiling broadly, gathering her papers with satisfaction. Marcus pushed past them on his way out of the courtroom, his expression venomous. "This is not over," he hissed at Katherine. "You have made a powerful enemy." "No," Katherine said, finding her voice stronger than she expected. "You made an enemy when you tried to control me, but you have no power over me anymore. I am done being afraid of you." Thomas Garrett did not even approach them, leaving the courthouse with his men in tow, his plans thoroughly thwarted. Elizabeth warned them that Marcus might try to make trouble in other ways, but legally, Katherine was untouchable now. They rode back to the ranch through the first snow of winter, the world transformed into something clean and white and new. Katherine felt as if a weight she had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. She was free, truly, completely free. That night, they celebrated with Tom, who rode over with a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. They toasted to justice, to freedom, to the future. And when Tom finally departed, navigating through the snow with the ease of long practice, Isaac and Katherine stood on the porch watching the snow fall. "What do you want to do now?" Isaac asked, his arm around her shoulders. "You could do anything, go anywhere. You are not running anymore." Katherine turned in his arms, looking up into his beloved face. "I want to stay right here. I want to build our ranch into something extraordinary. I want to raise children in this valley and teach them about freedom and choice and love. I want to grow old with you, watching the seasons change from this porch." "That sounds perfect," Isaac said, kissing her softly. "That sounds like everything I have ever wanted." The years that followed were filled with hard work, joy, challenges, and love. Katherine and Isaac expanded the ranch, building it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Katherine's natural talent with cattle proved invaluable, and her organizational skills helped them maximize their profits while treating their workers fairly. They hired a young couple to help with the ranch work, providing them with their own cabin and fair wages. Katherine insisted on treating them as partners rather than servants, creating a small community in their mountain valley. Tom became a regular visitor and a surrogate grandfather to the children that followed. Their first child, a son they named Daniel, was born during a spring snowstorm, with Isaac and a local midwife in attendance. Katherine had been terrified during the pregnancy, haunted by memories of her mother's difficult later years, but Isaac was there for every moment, holding her hand and telling her how strong she was. Daniel had his father's eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the moment he could walk, he followed Isaac around the ranch like a small shadow. Katherine would watch them together, her heart full to bursting with love for both of them. 2 years later, twin girls arrived, much to everyone's surprise. Grace and Emma were identical except for a small birthmark on Emma's left wrist, and they kept Katherine and Isaac constantly busy. But the chaos was joyful, the cabin filled with laughter and noise and the beautiful mess of family life. Katherine never forgot what she had escaped, never took her freedom for granted. She became known in the region as someone who would help women in difficult situations, offering them work on the ranch or connecting them with resources they needed. She corresponded regularly with Elizabeth Morgan, supporting her legal work however she could. Marcus Vaughn died 5 years after the trial, his business empire crumbling in his final years due to poor decisions and outstanding debts. Katherine felt a complex mix of emotions at the news. She had never wished him dead, but she could not mourn him either. The man had caused too much pain, destroyed too many lives. His death closed a chapter of her past that she was glad to leave behind. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Katherine by having a room added to the cabin specifically as her art studio. She had continued to draw over the years, mostly sketches of the children and the ranch, but she had never had a dedicated space for it. The studio had large windows facing the mountains and a comfortable chair where she could sit and work. "You gave me everything I needed to be myself," Isaac said as he showed her the finished space. "I wanted to give you a place where you could explore the parts of yourself you had to set aside." Katherine cried and kissed him, and spent that entire afternoon in the studio, drawing everything she saw and felt and loved about her life. The children grew. Daniel became as skilled a rancher as his father, but he also had his mother's love of learning and devoured every book he could get his hands on. Grace showed an early talent for music, learning to play the piano that Katherine and Isaac had shipped in at great expense. Emma loved the outdoors and animals, spending hours exploring the mountains with Bear's successor, a gentle giant of a dog they had named Scout. Katherine and Isaac's love for each other only deepened with time. They still sat on the porch every evening, talking about their day, making plans for the future. They still read to each other by firelight. They still made love with the passion and tenderness that had marked their early days, their connection growing stronger with each passing year. One evening, when Katherine was 40 and Isaac was 45, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Their children were grown now, Daniel running the ranch alongside his father while the twins pursued their own dreams. The house was quieter than it had been in years, and Katherine found she did not mind. This was simply another season of life, different but no less precious. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked, his hand clasped with hers. "Choosing this life?" "Sometimes I wonder if you might have been happier with more comfort, more society." Katherine looked at him in surprise. "How can you even ask that? Isaac, you gave me everything I ever wanted: freedom, choice, love, a family I helped create rather than one I was forced into. This ranch, these mountains, this life with you, it is all more than I ever dreamed possible that day when my hands shook pouring your coffee." "I am glad," Isaac said softly, "because you gave me everything too. I thought I was happy alone, but I did not know what happiness truly was until you. You brought light and love into my world, and every day I thank whatever fate brought you to that saloon." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, Bear's great-great-grandson Scout the Third dozing at their feet. Somewhere in the valley, cattle lowed peacefully. The creek sang its eternal song. The mountains stood watch as they had for millennia, as they would for millennia more. Katherine thought about the terrified young woman she had been, running from a future that would have destroyed her spirit. She thought about the courage it had taken to keep running, to keep hoping, to trust a stranger with kind eyes. She thought about all the moments, big and small, that had led her to this porch, this man, this life. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them 18 years ago. "I will always love you." "And I love you," Isaac replied, pulling her close. "Until the mountains crumble and the stars fade. You are my home, Katherine. You always will be." The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren who ran through the meadows where their parents had played. The ranch thrived under Daniel's management, incorporating new methods while respecting the traditions Isaac had established. Grace became a music teacher, traveling between settlements and bringing culture to the frontier. Emma married a veterinarian, and together they cared for animals across the territory, their reputation for skill and compassion spreading far and wide. Katherine and Isaac grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming gnarled with age and work. But their love remained constant, a steady flame that warmed them through harsh winters and bright summers alike. They still held hands on their evening walks, still kissed like newlyweds when they thought no one was watching, still found joy in each other's presence. On Katherine's 60th birthday, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the expanded cabin, laughter and music spilling out into the summer evening. Katherine stood on the porch, watching her family, overwhelmed by the beautiful, complicated life she had built from the ashes of fear and control. Isaac came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. "Happy birthday, my love. Happy life," Katherine corrected, leaning into him. "Thank you for giving me this. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when I did not believe in myself, for loving me through everything." "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done," Isaac said. "You are remarkable, Katherine Norton. You always have been." They stood together as the party continued around them. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that chance meeting. The coffee pot might have trembled in her hands that day in the saloon, but Katherine's heart had been steady, steady enough to trust, steady enough to love, steady enough to choose freedom over fear. And as the stars emerged above the mountains and her family's laughter filled the air, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again. Every single time. Because this life, this love, this freedom, it was worth everything she had risked to find it. The mountains stood eternal and the creek sang on, and in a small valley in Idaho, two hearts beat as one, their story a testament to the power of courage, kindness, and choosing love over fear. And they lived, truly lived, happily ever after.